The honeymoon was the moment everything started to crumble for me. It was the first real time I began to question my marriage, though deep down I wonder if the warning signs had been there all along, just hidden small enough to ignore, until suddenly they weren't. Sometimes you don't notice the cracks until the whole wall starts falling apart. Roland and I met at a design meetup in Cambridge, one of those casual networking events where people wear name tags and act like they're there to make connections, but mostly everyone's just circling the free snacks and drinks. Honestly, I wasn't looking for anything serious. I just wanted a night out, some human interaction that didn't involve clients criticizing my work. He walked up to me carrying the saddest little plate of hummus and carrots, and with this straight face he said, "Not sure who designed the lighting in here, but I feel like I'm being interrogated by IKEA." That made me laugh out loud. That was it. That was his magic. He wasn't loud. He wasn't trying to show off. He was tall, calm, and had this dry sense of humor that immediately cut through the noise. I had spent years dating men who thought interrupting me was passion, who thought talking over me meant leadership, who thought confidence meant never listening. And then came Roland. He listened. Really listened. He made me feel like my words had weight, like my thoughts weren't just background noise. That was his gift, and it drew me in completely. A year later we moved in together, and another year after that he proposed. I'll never forget that moment. On a freezing February afternoon in Vermont. We were at brunch, and I leaned too close to a candle. My mitten caught fire and Roland panicked while I couldn't stop laughing. I stood there, half hysterical, holding one burnt glove in the snow, and he just dropped to his knee. He asked me to marry him while my eyes were tearing up from laughter, and for a second, it felt like the most perfect, natural thing in the world. I said yes. Of course I said yes. At that moment, he looked at me like I was the only person who existed on this planet. And I believed him. But there was one part of Roland's life I hadn't really met yet, his mother. "She's not bad," he told me before our first visit. "She's just used to it being me and her. Since Dad passed, she hasn't really had much else. It's not about you." That was the first time I ever heard him say those words. It's not about you. At the time, I brushed it off, but maybe I should have paid more attention. Maybe that phrase was the first clue to the bigger problem that was waiting for me. When I finally met Virginia, she greeted us on her porch wearing a peach-colored cardigan and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She hugged Roland first, held him a little too long, and then finally turned to me. "So, you're Leona," she said flatly. Not a question. Not excitement. Just a statement. And in that moment, I felt the shift. It was like she was saying, "You're the outsider. You're the one stepping into something that already belonged to me." I remember sitting at that dinner table and hearing almost nothing. Just small talk, clinking forks, and then a laugh from Virginia that wasn't really a laugh at all. It was sharp, forced, and made the air feel heavier. The whole evening was awkward. She asked me twice if I could cook, like she hadn't heard me answer the first time. Then she leaned forward and asked if my job would let me work from home enough to raise children. I hadn't even thought that far ahead yet, but clearly, she had. And then she smiled at my hands, tilted her head, and said, "Soft hands don't look like you've done much laundry." Roland reached under the table and gently squeezed my knee. He gave me a small smile, the kind that said, "Don't take it seriously. Just let it go." So I did. At least, at first. 6 months later, we were planning the wedding. I told Roland I wanted something small, simple, and honest. He agreed immediately. We decided on a quiet ceremony in New Hampshire, by a lake, with string lights overhead. Just close friends, fresh air, and the people who mattered most. Nothing over the top, nothing fake. I thought Virginia would like the intimacy of it. I was wrong. No sit-down dinner? No DJ? No veil? She asked, her face visibly disappointed. "You don't want the day to feel real?" I smiled, trying to stay calm. "It will feel real," I told her. "We just want it to feel like us." She didn't argue. She just pursed her lips and let the silence do the talking. And once again, I let it go. The wedding itself was beautiful. My best friend, Maya, started crying even before I did, which made me laugh through my own tears. Roland looked at me that day like I was made of stars, like I was the only thing in the world he could see. For a brief moment, I felt like maybe, just maybe, Virginia had accepted me. She didn't make any cruel comments that day. She didn't say much at all, actually. But in the photos, she smiled. She even placed her hand gently on my shoulder in one of them. That tiny gesture gave me hope. After the wedding, I told Roland I wanted to plan the honeymoon together. I wanted something peaceful, someplace neither of us had ever been before. Just the two of us, no one else. He kissed my forehead and said, "Absolutely." So I trusted him. But weeks later, I noticed something odd. Roland had started researching hotels without me. He brushed it off whenever I asked, saying he wanted it to be a surprise. I wanted to believe him, so I didn't push too hard. 3 weeks after the wedding, we were sitting at breakfast when he suddenly slid his phone across the table, grinning like a little boy who just pulled off the best trick. "Got it," he said proudly. "Honeymoon booked." I leaned forward, smiling. "Where?" "The Bahamas. 7 nights, private bungalow, all-inclusive. I even booked a private transfer from the airport." I laughed and touched his arm. "Roland, that sounds amazing. But you didn't have to do it all alone. I wanted to help plan." He cut me off, beaming. "I wanted to surprise you. And there's one more thing." His smile wavered just slightly, and my stomach tightened. "What thing?" I asked. He hesitated. "My mom's coming with us." I blinked. Surely I misheard. "What?" "I got her a ticket," he said quickly, as though rushing would make it sound normal. "She's been so lonely lately, and she's never traveled outside the US. I thought it would be nice." My fork froze in midair. "You thought our honeymoon should include your mother?" He nodded, still trying to hold on to that smile, but it didn't reach his eyes anymore. And that was the exact moment my heart dropped. "She's always wanted to see the ocean," Roland said, his voice calm, almost too calm, like he'd already practiced this speech in his head. "I figured it would be nice. You two can bond. We'll all get massages, drink by the beach. It'll be fun." I blinked at him, unable to process what I was hearing. "You bought her ticket, without even asking me?" He winced, like a little boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "I just knew you'd say no." My mouth opened, but no sound came out. I stared at him across the breakfast table, searching his face for some sign that this was a joke, some ridiculous prank he was about to laugh off. But no, he was serious. Dead serious. "I get that it's weird," he continued quickly, trying to fill the silence. "But we'll have other trips. It's just 1 week." And she already said yes. Of course she did. I could practically picture it. Virginia probably agreed before he even finished the sentence. "I just want to do something kind," he added softly. "Is that really so terrible?" That broke me. I pushed back my chair and walked straight to the bathroom. I shut the door and leaned against the sink, staring at my reflection. The woman looking back at me wasn't a new bride glowing from love and excitement. She looked hollow. She looked like someone who had just been overwritten, erased, like her place in her own marriage had already been given away. The next day, Roland emailed me a shared itinerary titled Bahamas Bliss, family style. The words alone made my stomach twist. And there it was, Virginia's name typed right next to mine, as if she and I were interchangeable, as if she belonged in that spot. I didn't speak to him for 2 full days. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I didn't know what words wouldn't explode if I let them out. When Maya, my best friend, called, I finally cracked. "He what?" she nearly shouted after I explained. "He booked it for the 3 of you? On what planet does a man bring his mother on his honeymoon?" I stayed quiet. "That's not love, Leona," she said firmly. "That's attachment. There's a difference." "I'm trying to be understanding," I whispered, though my throat felt tight. "You're not his therapist," Maya snapped. "You're his wife." That made me laugh for half a second, this small, bitter laugh that quickly dissolved into tears. 3 days before the trip, Virginia came over for dinner. She floated into my kitchen like she already owned it, swirling her glass of wine like some smug sommelier. Her eyes twinkled as she casually announced, I bought matching swimsuits for Roland and me. Just for fun. I gripped the edge of the counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. You should get one too, Leona, Virginia said, her tone dripping with sweetness that felt anything but sweet. That way, we'll all look coordinated. I froze, my fork hovering above my plate. Matching swimsuits. With her son. On my honeymoon. I looked over at Roland, silently begging him to step in, to say something, anything. But he just smiled politely, passed me the salad, and changed the subject. That night, after she left, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I don't want to go, I told him, my voice sharp with frustration. We'll plan another trip. Just us. Like it's supposed to be. Roland let out a long sigh, heavy with disappointment. Leona, you're being unfair. No, I said firmly, my heart pounding. I'm being a wife. You're being a son. And that was the problem in one sentence. He wasn't just my husband, he was still her little boy. He didn't sleep in our bed that night. Neither did I. I laid awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong in less than a month of marriage. The morning of the flight was worse. We sat in the cab to the airport in silence, the kind of silence that buzzes in your ears and makes every breath feel heavy. When we arrived, Virginia was already waiting for us. She stood at the entrance with a giant straw hat, oversized sunglasses, and a travel pillow wrapped dramatically around her neck. Roland, she squealed, rushing forward to hug him like he had just returned from war. She didn't even glance at me. Not once. I may as well have been the cab driver. We made our way to the gate. Roland and Virginia chatted lightly, their voices bouncing back and forth. I sat in silence, feeling invisible, like the third wheel on my own honeymoon. Finally, the boarding group was called. Virginia jumped up eagerly, looping her arm through Roland's. They both stepped forward. I stayed seated. Roland turned back, confused. Leona, come on. I shook my head. I'm not going. His smile faltered.
What?
Don't be ridiculous. I told you I didn't agree to this. I said firmly, my chest tight. We're about to board. You can't just. I can. I cut him off, my voice steady. And I am. He froze, his eyes wide, like I had just broken some invisible contract he thought I'd signed by marrying him. I stood, pulled my carry-on to the side, and looked him straight in the eye. Enjoy your vacation, I said coldly, with your mother. Then I turned around and walked out of the terminal. I didn't cry until the Uber pulled away from the airport. And it wasn't sadness that broke me. It was fury. Rage that in less than a month of being married, I had been made to feel like a guest in my own life. Like I was crashing their family trip. My stomach twisted with humiliation as the city blurred past the car window. It wasn't just the airport that broke me. It was the months leading up to it. The way Virginia's opinions always seemed to outweigh my boundaries. The way Roland always managed to excuse it, brush it aside, ask me to be understanding. By the time I got home, I felt like every ounce of energy had been drained from my body. I dropped my suitcase by the door and collapsed onto the couch. The house was quiet, too quiet. For the first time since the wedding, I let myself really wonder if I had married a man or a boy who had never truly left his mother's shadow. The silence in the house was thick. Not the kind of silence that feels peaceful or calm, but the heavy kind that sits on your chest and reminds you of what you've just done. I lay on the couch staring at the ceiling fan until it blurred into nothing. About an hour later, my phone rang. Roland. His name lit up the screen, and my stomach twisted. I let it ring until it went quiet. A few seconds later, a text popped up. We just boarded. Please tell me you're getting on. I turned my phone off. I didn't have a plan. I hadn't packed food. I hadn't thought ahead. I just knew one thing with absolute clarity. I could not be on that flight. I couldn't spend 7 days plastering on a fake smile while Virginia tested me with little jabs, flaunted her spot at Roland's side, and treated me like an afterthought tagging along. The next morning, I called Maya. I walked away. I said, my voice small but steady. Damn right you did, she answered without hesitation. How do you feel? Like I just detonated my marriage. I whispered. No, she said firmly. You didn't blow it up. You refused to be collateral damage. She invited me over. That afternoon, I sat on her back porch with a mug of coffee and a box of pastries she'd picked up just for me. Her dog curled up at my feet, warm and safe. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Really breathe. I hadn't even realized how tightly I'd been holding everything inside until that moment of calm. You know what gets me? Maya said, breaking the silence. He knew. Roland knew you didn't want her there. You said it clearly. And he still booked that ticket. That's not cluelessness. That's him choosing her comfort over your dignity. I didn't disagree, but part of me still wanted to find an excuse for him. Maybe he really thought it would be okay, I murmured. That we'd all get along once we were there. Maya shook her head, scoffing. You told him no. Not once. More than once. He ignored you. That's not optimism, Leona. That's disrespect wrapped in a pretty bow. Her words cut through me, because I knew she was right. The next few days passed quietly. I didn't book some spontaneous solo vacation. I didn't post revenge pictures on social media to prove a point. Instead, I slowed down. I read books that had been gathering dust on my nightstand. I reorganized my closet. I walked the trail near the reservoir, listening to the crunch of gravel under my shoes. I cooked simple meals for one, sat at my own table, and ate in peace. And strangely enough, that silence, that calm, felt more like a real honeymoon than the trip I had been dreading. A honeymoon with myself. A honeymoon where no one was pushing me aside, questioning my worth, or making me feel small. On the fourth day, I finally turned my phone back on. 21 missed calls. 3 voicemails. 7 texts from Roland. 2 from Virginia. My hands shook as I pressed play on the first voicemail. Roland's voice spilled out, tired and strained. Leona, I don't know what to say. I wish you had just talked to me before you did this. This has been awful. Mom's upset. He paused, his voice breaking slightly. I'm trying to keep things together here. I closed my eyes, the phone heavy in my hand. Even from the other side of the world, it felt like I was still competing for space in my own marriage. The next voicemail made me press my lips together to keep from laughing or crying. Roland's voice sounded strained, almost desperate. Please call me, Leona. We got scammed by a taxi at the airport. Mom's freaking out. I don't know what to eat. We can't even find a decent restaurant. Please, just let me explain when I get back. I sat there listening, shaking my head. This was the dream vacation he had chosen over me? The last voicemail was even worse. His voice was flat, defeated. We're not speaking now. She blames me for everything. You should have come. This is hell. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That evening, my phone buzzed with a new text. This time it wasn't Roland, it was Virginia. If you wanted to prove a point, congratulations. My son's honeymoon is ruined. You should be ashamed. I stared at the words until the letters blurred. I didn't reply. A few minutes later, another message came through. Don't expect to be welcomed back into this family easily. I actually laughed out loud. Welcomed back. As if I had ever truly been welcomed in the first place. The irony hit me like a wave. She had fought so hard to stay glued to Roland's side, to insert herself into every moment, every decision. And now she had him all to herself in a foreign country. No buffer, no translator, no one to absorb her barbed little comments or smooth over her tantrums. It was just the two of them, locked together in paradise that had turned into a cage. And me? I went to sleep early that night, and for the first time in months, I didn't wake up with a knot in my chest. By the 7th day, the day their flight was scheduled to return, I felt lighter. I spent the morning cleaning the apartment, opening the windows to let in the breeze, and changing the sheets. Not for them, for me. Because I knew whatever conversation came next would be heavy, and I needed to face it with both feet firmly planted in my own space. At exactly 3:14 p.m., the intercom buzzed. My stomach clenched. I thought it would be Roland, but when I looked at the screen, it was Virginia. For 3 full seconds, I just stared, frozen, debating whether to press the button. Then, with a deep breath, I did. The door opened, and she barged in like she owned the building, dragging her suitcase behind her. She smelled like stale airport perfume and irritation. Without even a hello, she dropped her bag loudly by the door and looked at me with narrowed eyes. "Well," she said, her voice sharp enough to slice the air. "I hope you're satisfied." I blinked slowly, confused but calm. "Excuse me?" She crossed her arms, her face twisted with anger. "You ruined the only real vacation I've had in years. You embarrassed Roland, and you made this family look ridiculous." Virginia's voice cracked like a whip. She stood in my living room, hands on her hips, glaring at me as if she were the injured party. I folded my arms, grounding myself. I didn't do any of that. I simply opted out of a decision I wasn't consulted on. "Oh, don't get noble now," she snapped, her lip curling. "You abandoned your husband." I stared at her, unblinking. "No." I stood up for myself. "There's a difference." She scoffed, tossing her head back, and wandered into my kitchen like she owned the place, opening cabinets as if she had lived here her whole life. "You don't get it, do you?" she said, pulling a glass down without asking. "Roland and I, we've been through everything together. Years of it. You're just new. You don't know what he needs." I followed her in, keeping my voice calm even as my pulse raced. Maybe what he needs is a wife who actually gets a say in her own marriage. Maybe what he needs is someone who won't let herself be sidelined like a child. Her eyes flashed. He needs someone who doesn't run at the first sign of difficulty. "You mean someone who will tolerate being steamrolled?" I shot back. She slammed the fridge shut so hard the shelves rattled. "You could have made this work. You could have been flexible. But no, you chose ego over family." I let out a slow breath, then said, colder than I meant to, "No, Virginia. I chose sanity over submission." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't stop. She launched into a rant about how much she had sacrificed for Roland, her voice rising, her words tumbling out with practiced venom. She talked about the years she raised him, the nights she stayed up worrying, the way she had protected him from the world. And then, right in the middle of her tirade, the door opened. Roland stepped inside. He looked exhausted, his skin pale, his eyes shadowed, his shoulders slumped like the weight of the trip had ground him down. Virginia straightened instantly, her tone flipping to syrupy sweet. "Roland." Finally. I was just telling her. But he held up a hand, cutting her off. "I heard everything." From the hallway. The words froze her. Her mouth opened, then closed. He turned to me. His eyes softened, though there was still pain there. "Can we talk?" Virginia tried again, her mouth half open, but Roland raised his hand again, firmer this time. "Alone." For a long moment, she stood there, stunned, her face cycling between disbelief and indignation. Finally, with a sharp exhale, she grabbed her suitcase and stormed past us. The door slammed behind her, and we waited in silence until we heard the elevator doors close. Only then did Roland let his body collapse onto the couch, like the strings holding him up had finally snapped. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, rubbing his face with both hands. "She made the trip miserable," he admitted, his voice ragged. "We fought every single day. We got lost the very first night. She argued with the concierge about everything. She refused to eat anything that wasn't American enough." I sat down across from him, saying nothing, just watching. He exhaled shakily, shaking his head. And the worst part, his voice trailed off, eyes closing briefly before finding mine again. "The whole time, I kept wishing you were there instead. I kept thinking about how stupid I'd been," Roland said, his voice low, almost breaking. "I could have had that trip with you. It should have been us." I raised an eyebrow, steady but sharp. "But you chose her." He swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "I thought I was being kind. I thought I was keeping the peace, keeping everyone happy. But all I really did was hurt the one person I should have been protecting most." The words hung between us, heavy as stone. Neither of us spoke. The silence filled the room, wrapping around us like a blanket that was far too tight. Finally, he whispered, "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I know I don't deserve that. But I want to fix this. I really, really do." I studied him for a long time. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes tired but honest. There was a softness there I hadn't seen in weeks. Then, without saying a word, I stood up, walked over to the cabinet, and pulled out something I'd been hiding away. A brochure. I handed it to him. He unfolded it slowly, almost like he was afraid of what it might say. When his eyes landed on the bold letters across the front, he let out a surprised laugh. "Alaska?" "Not tropical," I said, my lips twitching into the smallest smile. "But very, very far away." He looked up at me then, and for the first time since the wedding, I saw the man I had fallen in love with, the one who looked at me like I was his world, not his second choice. "We go alone," I said firmly. "Just the two of us." He hesitated, as if some part of him was still programmed to ask, "What about Mom?" But then he nodded, slow and certain. "Yes." No one else. Just us. The following weeks were quiet, almost too quiet. There were no dramatic fights, no slammed doors at midnight, no bouquets of guilt flowers arriving the next morning, no grand speeches about change. Just the slow, aching work of two people trying to untangle the knot that had formed in the middle of their brand new marriage. We talked more. A lot more. Real conversations, the kind that leave you raw and tired, but lighter somehow. Sometimes it was too real. Roland admitted things I think he had never said out loud before. He confessed how much of his identity had been shaped by Virginia, not because he wanted it that way, but because that was simply how it had always been. "Since my dad died," he said one night, curled up on the couch with his head in his hands, "she built her world around me. And I let her. She made me feel like I owed her everything. And I kept paying her back, with little pieces of myself." That line stuck with me. It hit me hard, because that's exactly what I felt when she barged into our honeymoon. It was like someone had sliced off a part of my husband and handed it back to her, leaving me with the scraps. I wasn't sure if love could survive something like that. But I wanted to try. I wanted to find out. Virginia, of course, didn't make it easy. She didn't speak to me, not directly. Instead, she left icy little comments under Roland's social media posts, always vague enough to deny, but sharp enough to sting. She forgot my birthday, though she managed to send him a long sentimental text that same day. And when Christmas rolled around, she mailed us a card with glittery gold letters and a family photo attached. It was signed, Roland and Family, the word family underlined twice, like a dagger aimed straight at me. I didn't respond to her message. I just couldn't. I wasn't in the mood for another round of her psychological games. Every word from her felt like a little trap, and I was tired of stepping into them. Instead, I put all my energy into something that actually mattered, planning the trip Roland and I should have had from the very beginning. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't tropical. It wasn't the picture-perfect honeymoon that people brag about on Instagram. But it was ours. Just a quiet week in Alaska during the off-season. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. We had gone from imagining sunlit beaches, turquoise waters, and fruity cocktails with umbrellas to preparing for snow-covered mountains, long hikes, and nights curled up by a fire. And somehow, that felt perfect. We left in early March. There were no matching swimsuits stuffed into our luggage, no group photos waiting to be staged, no Virginia hanging over our shoulders. It was just the two of us. And for the first time since our wedding, I actually felt married. Not in the legal sense, we'd been married for months already, but in the emotional sense. In the real sense. This wasn't about paperwork or ceremonies or family obligations. This was about us, about waking up together and choosing each other every single day. There were no dramatic turnarounds, no grand speeches, no Hollywood-style redemption arc. Just two people trying to figure out how to love each other without the constant interference of someone else's expectations. We hiked through trails so quiet that even our footsteps seemed too loud. We cooked simple meals, pasta with Jared sauce in a rented cabin kitchen, and somehow, It tasted better than any fancy restaurant. We played ridiculous card games by the fireplace, laughing so hard one night that we spilled cocoa all over the rug. One morning, we sat in silence as a family of moose wandered past our window, their breath fogging up in the icy air. Neither of us spoke. We just sat there, warm and quiet, breathing the same air, sharing the same moment. And it was enough. On the flight home, Roland reached for my hand. He didn't make a big show of it, didn't look around nervously, didn't try to find the right words. He just squeezed my hand gently and whispered, "Thank you." I didn't ask him what for. I didn't need to. I just squeezed back, letting him know I understood. When we returned, the first thing waiting for us wasn't a welcome home bouquet or a warm meal. It was a voicemail from Virginia. Of course, it was. Her voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and cold. "I hope your little wilderness trip was everything you dreamed of. Just know that family isn't something you can run from forever. And when this all falls apart, and it will, I hope you remember who always loved him first." I didn't even hesitate. I deleted it without flinching. For once, I felt no guilt, no shaking hands, no rush of anger. Just nothing. We didn't talk about her for a while. There wasn't anything left to say. But even in that silence, something began to shift. Roland stopped answering her late-night guilt-drenched phone calls. He stopped letting her twist boundaries into accusations. One night, when she sent him a 5-paragraph email accusing me of stealing his soul, he actually blocked her for the first time in his life. "She doesn't get to define what love is anymore," he said quietly as we folded laundry side by side. "Not mine. Not ours." And for the first time, I believed him. Rebuilding trust wasn't easy. It wasn't like flipping a switch. It was more like working a sore muscle, stretching it, testing it, using it again, even when it hurt. Slowly, carefully, we rebuilt. 3 months passed. Then 6. And then something unexpected happened. Virginia asked to visit. She didn't call this time. Instead, she sent a letter. It was handwritten, in neat cursive, the kind of writing you don't see much anymore. The words were simple. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about what I did. I won't pretend I understand you yet, Leona. But I think I'm finally trying. If you'd ever consider letting me come by, I'd like to apologize in person and maybe, just maybe, start over." I must have read that letter 10 times. It wasn't warm. It wasn't begging. It wasn't poetic or flowery. But for the first time, it felt human. Something about it was real, stripped down, almost raw. Roland didn't push me either way. He just put his hand on mine and said, "This is yours to decide. I'm not stepping in." I nodded. And then I sat with it. For days. I kept the letter on the counter, then moved it to my nightstand, then tucked it into a book. A week later, when I finally picked up the phone and dialed her number, my voice surprised me. Calm. Clear. "You can come by," I said. When Virginia walked into our apartment, she looked smaller. Not thinner, not sick, but smaller in spirit. Like someone who had been carrying a heavy load on her back for years and had finally set it down, only to realize she didn't remember how to stand tall without it. She didn't come empty-handed. She held a box, plain and brown, and handed it to me with both hands. Inside was a photo album. Not pictures of her and Roland, like I feared, but of me and him. Our wedding day. Photos she had printed and carefully arranged herself. There was a little note tucked into the first page. It read, "This day was always yours. I see that now." I didn't say anything right away. I didn't even know what to say. Relief? Suspicion? Maybe even a small flicker of grace? The feelings tangled inside me, and I just stood there, silent. Virginia sat down at the kitchen island and looked directly at me. For once, her voice was steady, not sharp. "I was wrong," she said. "Not just about the trip. About you. About what marriage means. I treated my son like he was my lifeboat, the only thing keeping me from sinking. But he's not mine to cling to. He's a man and he loves you. That should have been enough for me." I nodded, quietly, still cautious. "You don't have to forgive me," she added softly. "But I'm trying." And for the first time since I had met her, She didn't look like a threat. She didn't look like someone trying to control us. She just looked like a mother, one who had been drowning in her own fear of being left behind, finally trying to swim. She stayed for an hour. We had tea. We talked a little about nothing too deep. And then she left. No drama, no lingering. Just a quiet goodbye. That night, Roland asked me how I felt. I didn't give him a neat, tied-up answer. I just said, "We'll see." He smiled, almost with relief. That's more than I hoped for. A year later, when our anniversary came, Roland and I planned a trip. Just us. No interference, no extra voices, no surprise guests. I packed light, sunscreen, a sketch pad, 2 books. And one rule, our rule. No one else gets to write our itinerary. We kept that promise. Every moment was ours to choose. Where to walk, what to eat, when to sleep in, when to watch the sunset. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like this marriage was truly mine again. Not borrowed. Not divided. Not something I had to fight for. Mine. Ours. Finally. Time passed, not quickly, but steadily, the way snow melts in the spring, slow, quiet, almost unnoticed until one day you look up and realize the landscape has changed. Virginia didn't transform overnight. She didn't suddenly become the perfect mother-in-law or erase all the old wounds with one letter and one visit. But little by little, she softened. Instead of guilt-ridden phone calls at midnight, she began sending postcards from the farmer's market, notes about the weather, or recipes she thought Roland and I might enjoy cooking together. It wasn't much, but it was different. It was lighter. And Roland changed too. The boy who once felt trapped between 2 women finally stood as his own man. He stopped apologizing for having boundaries, stopped shrinking when his mother sighed or criticized. He began to breathe easier, laugh louder, and love me without hesitation. For the first time since the wedding, I felt not only chosen but protected. There were still days I doubted. Days when I wondered if Virginia's calm would last, or if it was only a fragile truce. But I discovered something important. I didn't need her approval anymore. I didn't need her permission to be his wife, to claim our marriage as ours. That freedom was mine to take, not hers to give. The second year of our marriage felt like the first real one. We hosted dinners in our apartment with friends, spent Sundays walking through the park, and planned trips that belonged only to us. The memories we built didn't have shadows hanging over them anymore. They were ours alone. And Virginia? She found her own path. Slowly, she built a life outside of Roland. She started volunteering at a community center, teaching sewing classes to young moms. She even adopted a small rescue dog, a scruffy, stubborn terrier she named Daisy. And though she still carried her sharp edges, there was a gentleness I hadn't seen before. The biggest surprise came on our 3rd anniversary. Roland and I went back to Alaska, the place where we had first learned to choose each other again. When we returned, there was a package waiting at our door. It was from Virginia. Inside was another photo album. Not of her, not of Roland, not even of me, but of us. Pictures she had quietly collected from our friends, from Roland's phone, from the times we'd shared our lives without noticing she was paying attention. The last page had only one sentence, written in her familiar cursive. I don't love him first anymore. I just love him enough to let you love him most. For the first time in years, I cried over something Virginia had given me, not tears of frustration, but of release. I showed Roland. He held me close, kissed the top of my head, and whispered, "We made it." And he was right. We had. Not perfectly, not without scars, but stronger for every test we endured. Marriage, I finally understood, isn't about the grand gestures or the perfect beginnings. It's about the daily choosing. It's about fighting for your space together, even when others try to claim it. And most of all, it's about protecting the quiet moments, the mornings with coffee, the laughter over burned pancakes, the walks that lead nowhere but still feel like everywhere. Our story didn't end with a dramatic confrontation or a fairy tale redemption. It ended and began again with 2 people, side by side, saying, "This is ours." And we're not giving it away to anyone else. And that was enough. More than enough.